Okay. We're here on Daf Chav Ches Amud Beis, and we're up to Amar Rabbi Yehuda Marav. So let's see how it's approximately 15 lines down from the top of the Amud, if that helps. And the first word in the line is Uliyabnu. We have it?
Yeah.
Yes? Jeff, you with us? About 15 lines down from the top of Chav Ches Amud Beis. And the first word in the line is Liyabnu. And then it says Amar Rabbi Yehuda. That's what I have. If you disagree, let me know.
I'm looking at Rabbi Yehuda, and I'm looking for whatever.
You got it. All right. So basically, what we're about to learn here is a statement of Rabbi Yehuda in the name of Rav, and also it's reflected that same halacha, that same din, is recorded in a brisa of Rabbi Chia, Tani Rabbi Chia, right? All over Shas we have brises that are brought down by Rabbi Chia, and Rabbi Chia is like the last of the Tanoim. He was Rav's uncle, if I remember. In any event, and the question is, we have 15 arayos listed in our Mishnah at the beginning of the Masechet on Daf Beis. B'kulan ani kori bahen, in all the arayos of the 15, I can apply the principle of asura lezeh muteres lezeh. In other words, if you have two sisters that fell from two brothers, so Reuben and Shimon were married to Rachel and Leah, and we have now two other brothers, Levi and Yehud, and one is an erva to one of the two sisters, meaning either Rachel or Leah, is an erva to Levi. The other sister is an erva to Yehuda, and therefore we mix match, right? That means that, let's say Leah was the erva to Levi, right? We put the two lamets together, then Levi could be the Abim Roch, and Leah and Rachel is an erva to the other brother, to Yehuda, and therefore Yehuda will be Mi'abim Rachel, right? So that's how we work it out. Ve'achosok shehi yevimta ochol letzis o misyabemis, which means that the Mishnah is offering an option of yibum for both of these two brothers. And the reason why, as we said yesterday, there's no erva called achos kukaso is because since the other sister is an erva, right, the one that he's not miyabim, obviously, therefore she didn't have an afil for yibum, and there was no zika, and if there's no zika, there's no achos zukukaso. Now the Gemara records machlokes as to how to interpret this statement, which is either Rav's statement or the Brisa of Rabbi Chia. It's right, both the same. And we start with Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda was the one who actually quoted Rav, and therefore it's almost understood that Rabbi Yehuda would be the proper person to interpret the words of Rav. He's the one who quoted Rav. So if he's in charge of the transmission of this statement, then he should be the one to interpret this statement. Mitargim, and he interpreted it. And what did he interpret? That although it sounds like Bekulon, which means all 15, but that's not really what it means. it only means 9 out of the 15. And that's called Mechamoso V'elech. I don't have that volume with me here, I don't think. Maybe it's here somewhere. Be lazy, right? Does anybody have? Can I borrow this just for a second? Right back. Should be. So if you take a look at Muslim, before that you have Bito, Baspito, 2, Baspino is 3, Baspino is 5, Baspito is 6. But Hamoso is number 7. So what we're going to do is we're going to fast forward to number 7, which is Hamoso. We're going to cut out the first 6. And the first 6 are called Bito. They're all different permutations of the Erev of Bito. And that's what it says here, Mechamoso v'elech. So when he refers, he meaning Rav or Rab Chia referred to Kulon, they're referring to Kulon from a certain point and on, from Chamoso and on. Aval Shisa, Bavi Dresha, but the 6 that come before, which are all different types of Bas, right? Either in Bito, Baspito, Baspino, Basishto, Baspito, Baspino, all of those low. They are not included in this statement about 2 sisters of Asura Lezem and Teres Lezem. Why? My timer. And the Gemara is going to argue now that the only way you can work out a case of Bito of 2 sisters is through onus, but not through marriage. You cannot, you just can't structure it in a marriage situation. Kevon de Bito, be'onsim hu de mishkachas la, is benesuin lo mishkachas la, is bekrovi benesuin kamayri v'lo be'onsim lo kamayri. That Mishnah is not referring to a case of an erva that was generated by onus, by a rape situation, that the erva status came into being through an onus. Okay, so let's see if we can fill this in with names. In our copy of the Masechet, we have 2 diagrams. Okay, Onas Ruvain es Sarah. V'yoldalo es Rachel. V'achar kach Onas Shimon es Sarah. V'yoldalo es Leah. This situation of Sarah is a very sad situation, if you will. She gets to be the culprit, the victim here in this case. So she was a victim of 2 onsim, and she gave birth to 2 daughters who are sisters from the mother, right? She was raped first by Reuven, this Sarah, right? And then she was raped by Shimon. From the first rape of Reuven, Rachel was born. From the second rape of Shimon, Leah was born. So that means that Rachel is the daughter of Reuven, Leah is the daughter of Shimon, but they share the same mother. So they're sisters because they were both born to Sarah. Okay. Now, who comes into the picture? Levi. Levi marries Rachel, And we said that Rachel was the daughter of Reuven. Yehuda marries Rachel's sister Leah. They're sisters from the mother. And that's Leah bas Shimon. Mesu Levi v'Yehuda b'libanim. So now Levi and Yehuda die, and Levi, we said, was married to Rachel. Yehuda was married to Leah. So both Rachel and Leah fall for Yibum to Reuven and Shimon. Now Rachel, we said her name, her full name is Rachel bas Reuven. And now she's falling to Yibum to Reuven, who is her father. Okay, but Shimon has no relationship whatsoever with Rachel. Therefore, when Rachel falls for Yibum to both Reuven and Shimon, although Reuven quite clearly cannot be miyabim Rachel, because that's his daughter, but Shimon could be miyabim Rachel. What about the fact that she's a chos kukaso? So that's not called a chos kukaso. Why? Because her sister, that's Rachel's sister Leah, is Shimon's daughter. So therefore, Leah is not zkukalo, she doesn't have a zika to Shimon because Shimon is her father. So Shimon now could be miyabim Rachel. Now Leah, we said, was his bas, and therefore she could be misyabim not to Shimon but to Reuven. But Barayos b'nesuin lo mishkachas. So this kind of situation of two sisters and two brothers can marry each one, the one that's not the Erva, because it's not a chos ukaso, that can only come about through rape. But b'nesuin lo mishkachasle, you cannot have this din of two achios falling to two brothers, and each one could be miyabim one of the two sisters. That's impossible in nesuin. Shetia kol achas mehen muteres li'echad v'asura l'sheni. Right, that one of these two sisters is allowed to have yibum with one of the two brothers and not with the other brother. Kigon shenasa Reuven es Sarah. So instead of a rape situation between Reuven and Sarah, there was a marriage relationship of Reuven and Sarah. And from this marriage relationship came Rachel. Then what happens? Reuven, right now Shimon is going to have a relationship with Rachel, but that's going to only be after Reuven divorces Sarah. So Reuven divorces Sarah. The Ovar Shimon al Isa Gruchas Achiv Vinasa es Sarah. V'yodalo es Leah, Vinasa Levi es Rachel bas Reuven, v'Yehuda nasa es Achosa Leah bas Shimon, u'Mesu Levi v'Yehuda v'Lobanim naflu nisheim lifnei Reuven v'Shimon. Arei Reuven asa b'Rachel she bito, v'yasa gam b'Leah she bas ishto. V'imkeni efshe shtei achios min ha'em yiu banos shel shnei achim me'icha nesuah. So it's going to be a double erva, and you won't have one of them who is not an erva. And the only way we can construct such a case is el banu saso, because in such a case, Reuven is allowed to have a marriage relationship with Leah, the daughter of Shimon, because it's bas anu saso she'ena bita. Second, I just want to get that straight. Shebazer Ruvain Mutter Belea Bas Shimon. Belea Bas Shimon. So again, we said that Ruvain is allowed to marry Leah, daughter of Shimon. Shum Dehi Bas Anusoso She'eno Beat She'ena. Where did I lose that last piece? Somebody explain to me that last piece. Shum Dehi Bas Anusoso She'ena Bito. All right, I don't know what he's trying to add over there, but in any event, so the Mishnah is B'Nesuin Kamairi, right? Relatives through Nesuin, Aval Be'onsim Lo Kamairi. Okay. So all that was Rabbi Yehuda, correct? Rabbi Yehuda. Now we get to Abai. Abai says, Mitargem, I can interpret, let's say the Brisa of Rabbi Chia, that af bito me'anusaso, even in a case of bito me'anusaso, you cannot come up with asur lezeh muteres lezeh. I'm sorry. Even though in bito, through nesuin, we cannot come up with asur lezeh muteres lezeh, we can only do so in bito me'anusaso. But nevertheless, since there is such a feasible case, then it's included in asur lezeh muteres lezeh, iboy b'onsim tevi v'iboy b'nesuin tevi. So we could interpret it as referring to all 15 arayos, and we can have two sisters and asur lezeh muteres lezeh, but it's going to have to be through nesuin. Right? It doesn't have to be through 8 onsim, it could even be through nesuin. What does it mean? It means like there are 15 arayos, and all of them come under the possibility of shtei achios muteres lezeh asur lezeh. In some cases, let's say the 9 last cases, then it's referring to the nesuin. In the first 6 cases, it's referring to onsim. But there's no need to exclude it from the count of the 15 arayos. Avo, but there is one case, says Abaye, where we have to exclude asur lezeh muteres lezeh. Cannot work out. What's that? Eishes achiv shelo haya bo lam. Lo means it's not included in the mission of asur lezeh muteres lezeh. Evan da'aliba de Rabbi Shimon hu de mishkaches lo, aliba de Rabbanan lo mishkaches lo, hu bepluta lo kamayr. So the possibility of asur lezeh muteres lezeh in the case of eishes achiv shelo haya bo lamo is only feasible according to Rabbi Shimon, but not according to the Rabbanan. And therefore, the Mishnah doesn't want to get into this machlokas. And basically what Abai is saying is that our Mishnah could have actually jacked it up from 15 to 16, but in order to do so, we would have to invoke the Shita of Rabbi Shimon, and it would be rejected by the Rabbanan. Now, what is Rabbi Shimon's Shita, which we've had in the past, about Eishes Achiv Shelo Haya Bo Lamo? He says the following, that if, let's say, the Achiv was born before Yibum, then it's considered Lo Haya Bo Lamo. But if the Yibum took place before the birth of the other son, then it's not considered Eishes Ach Shalohay Bolamo. And why is that? Because when he came into the world, his brother was already married to this woman. So that Zika is completely removed. So what's the case? Let's go through the case. Ruvain, Shimon, Levi, Yehud, right? The four brothers. Rachel, Leah, two sisters. Nasa, Ruvain, Es Rachel. Okay. Nasa, Ruvain, Es Rachel. Takes the name on me. Fine. Okay. Shimon, Nasa, Es Leah. Meis Ruvain below Banim. V'nafla Rachel l'fnei achiv liyibu. V'achar kach nolad lehem ach Yisachar. Right, so Yisachar is the fifth brother. Matzah es Rachel Eishes Ruvain Asura Olav Mishum Eishes Achiv Shlohaya Bolam. So as far as Yisachar is concerned, Rachel, the wife of Ruvain, is Eishes Achiv Shlohaya Bolam. The Achkach Yibem Levi Es Rachel Eishes Ruvain Umeis Gam Shimon below Banim V'nafla Leah, who is the wife of the late Shimon, Lifnei Achiv Liyibu. The Achakach Nolad Lehem Zvulun. So he's the sixth brother. Umatzes Leah, Eishes Shimon, Asura Lov Mishum Eishes Achiv Shlohai Bolama. The Achakach Yibem Yehuda Es Leah, Eishes Shimon, Mesugam Leva. Levi v'Yehuda b'libanim and Afla Shem liyibu. Arei l'shitas Rabbi Shimon Rachel asura lisacher mishum sha'isa eishes Ruvain shlohai b'olam shal lisacher muteres l'zvulun shenolad achrei shenisyav Levi. That's the shita of Rabbi Shimon, that if the brother was born after the yibum, then there's no erev of Eishes Achim Shlohai B'Olam. So therefore, Eishes Ruvain could fall for Yibum to Zvulun after the Yibum of Levi. V'ein achos kukasa, keven shel Levi achosa, einos kukala. V'leah hasura l'zvulun, mishum sha'isa Eishes Shimon shlohai b'olamo shel zvulun, but muteres l'isachar shlohai b'olamo shel Shimon. V'ein achos kukasa, keven shel Rachel achosa einos kukala. Well, leave it to Rabbanan, who hold that even in the case of Yibem v'yachkach nolad, still is the erva of Eishes Achim Shalai B'Level of Eshkachasla. You cannot have a case of Asura L'Zeh Muteres L'Zeh in Eishes Achim Shalai B'Level. According to the Rabbanan, Rachel is Asura Gam L'Zvulun, Kevan Shalai B'Level Shal Ruvain, a mess. Lo Mahani Mashim Motza Beheter. After Yibum, Shari L'Shitasam, Gam B'Yibum, Yibem L'Basof Nolad, Yesh Iser, Eishes Achim Shlohai B'Olam. And therefore, Abaye, Lo Hemid Abayes HaMishnah, B'Erva, Shel Eishes Achim Shlohai B'Olam, Mishum D'Bepluta Lo Kamayim. And now we have another interpretation of Rav and Rabbi Chia, Rav Safra Metargem. Af b'yeshes achim shelo haya b'olam. To mishkachas la B'shisa achi al liver of Shimon. So we had the case with 6 brothers going all the way up to Zvulun, and according to Shimon, you could have muteres lazeh, asur lazeh, because there's no Yisrael Shach if there was already Yibum before he was born. And the fact that the Rabbanan disagree, okay, the Rabbanan disagree, but the Mishnah is talking and reflecting the Shita Rabbi Shimon. Now the Gemara offers a mnemonic device, the simonach of Asur L'Zeh Muteres L'Zeh is Meis Nolad V'Yibem, Meis Nolad V'Yibem, which means that Reuben and Shimon were married to 2 sisters. Levi and Yehuda were married to 2 wives, Nochrios. They were not related to each other, the 2 wives of Levi and Yehuda. Only the wives of Reuben and Shimon were sisters. Meis Reuven. So Reuven dies, and after he dies, Nolad Yisachar. So Yisachar was not alive at the time of Reuven. They didn't overlap at all. And Yibem Levi. Levi was Miyabem, Reuven's wife. And Meis Shimon and Nolad Zvulun. And Yibem Yehuda. So Yehuda was Miyabem, the wife of Shimon. Mesu Levi v'Yehuda b'lo banim naflu kama Yisachar Zvulun is Asur L'Zeh Muteres L'Zeh, Asur L'Zeh Muteres L'Zeh B'chosa she'yivimta ochel letis ovis yabemes, and this is all possible and feasible according to Shimon. So according to Shimon, we have Mitzias of Eishes Achar Shel Haybo Lomo, where it's Muteres L'Zeh Asur L'Zeh, and therefore the Mishnah is talking even about a case of Eishes Achar Shel Haybo Lomo. So the Gemara asks, Lomali, why do you tell me that we're talking about 6 brothers? Yibem, Yehuda, as Eishes Shimon, Liachar Leidas Zvulun, is below Yibem, Yehuda, Nami Michkachas Lo. You don't have to have 6 brothers, you can whittle it down to 5 brothers. You go, Shemeis Reuben v'achach Nolad Yisachar, Achach Yibem Levi, Meis Shimon v'Nolad Zvulun, v'achach Meis Levi, v'nafla Ishto l'fnei Zvulun v'Yisachar, Yachad im Eishes Shimon shadayin zkuki mimisas baila. Is that dinu she'Yisachar also Eishes Levi, shenolad matza'ah be'iser Eishes Achiv Ruvain shelo hayvo lomo. Miyabim is Eishes Shimon shehi shahayvo lomo. Uzvulin aser b'leah sharehi Eishes Ach shelo hayvo lomo. Umiyabim is Rachel shahaysa b'tchila Eishes Ruvain. Lefisha nolad li'achar sheyivma Levi uksheyov teba li'olam kvar matzah behet. It's lamatzach la'osif sheyivem Yehuda es Eishes Shimon. Basically, the Gemara is simplifying the scenario and cutting out the yibum between Yehuda and the wife of Shimon. The Gemara is going to try to come up with an extra chidush to explain why Rav Safra set up the scenario with 6 brothers and added the last piece of the puzzle that Yehuda was Miyavim Eishes Shimon, which seems to be unnecessary. So the Gemara is going to give a whole explanation for this. Okay. And a lot of these details you have to go over and over and work it out with charts and so. I mean, we're getting the basic structure of it. some of the you fine tune the nuances, you have to. So the Gemara is now explaining again why Rav Safra mentioned 6 brothers, Mishum Tzara. Right, there's an extra chiddush here with regard to Eshes Yehuda and Zvulun. Zvulun was brother number 6. He writes here, Liachar Yibem Yehudas Leah Eshes Shimon. Right, that was what we wanted to add, that Yehuda was Miyavim Eshes Shimon, and we wanted to know what was the additional chiddush of that case of Yehuda being Miyavim Eshes Shimon. Mishum Tzaras. Here we're introducing the Tzara. He says, "V'gam Eches Levi Arishona Asura al Yisachar Mishum Tzaras." V'imat Tzaros in Achios. Oh, this is even more complicated. Right? You go in Sarah v'Rivka Achios, v'Nosel Levi es Sarah, v'Yehuda es Rivka. Everybody's marrying 2 sisters here. Ukshemeis Ruve nolad Yisachar, v'Yibem Levi es Rachel Eshes Ruve, v'Yachach Meis Shimon v'nolad Zvulun, v'Yibem Yehudas Leah Eshes Shimon, Meisu Levi v'Yehuda v'Lobani v'Naflu Sarah v'Rivka l'fnei Yisachar Zvulun, Adin shesara Eshes Levi asura Yisachar mishum she tzaras Rachel. Ishto shel Ruven asura Yisachar mishum Eshes ach shel Ohev Olam. So we have here Sarah, Eshes Levi, as the Tzara of Rachel, Eshes Ruven. V'Sara muteres l'Zvulun shenolad achar shenisyaba. This is Reb Shimon. Achar shenisyaba Rachel tzarasel Levi. V'achosa Rivka asura l'Zvulun mishum she tzaras Leah ishto shel Shimon asura al Zvulun mishum Eshes achar shel Ohev Olam. Muteres l'Yisachar shenolad b'chai Shimon. L'chein hosif Rav Safra od ach lomar shematzinu gam batzaros sadin shel asura l'zeh muteres l'zeh b'achosa shehi yevimta. So we have another brother, number 6, who's brought into the picture to show that even with regard to tzaros, we can create asura l'zeh muteres l'zeh. Hateinach, the Gemara asks, that makes sense. That asura l'zeh muteres l'zeh tzara avol tzaras tzara ma'ikalamim. Where do we find the case in tzaras tzara? There's a Mishnah at the beginning of the Masechta mentions not just the din of tzara, but also the din of tzaras tzara. And on that, the Mishnah says in our parak, asura l'zeh muteres l'zeh. So it's got to work out even in the case of tzaras tzara. Our answers keep going to Hadar v'Abminu Nami Gad v'Osher. Oh boy, now we're introducing another 2 brothers, Gad and Osher. And they were Miyabim, right, the first wives, respectively, of Levi and Yehuda after the death of Levi and Yehuda. Now, Gad and Osher have additional wives that are sisters. So there are 3 sets of brothers that married 3 different sets of sisters. Mesu Gad v'Yoshev, and often Shasayim Liyibum L'Tnei Yisachar Zvulun, and Areda Shosayim Arishonos Shel Gad v'Yoshev Tzaras Tzara L'Neshosayim Shel Ruven v'Shimon. We have here a case of Tzara of a Tzara. Ishto Shel Gad Asura L'Zvulun Mishum Tzaras Eshes Achi Shel Ohev Olam. V'chein ishto shel asher asura liyisachar mishum tzaras eishes achiv Ruvain shelo haya ba'olam. And this leads us to the Mishnah here on the bottom of page of Ches Amud Beis. Shlosha achim, shahoyu shnayim mehem nesuin l'shtei achios, o leisha ubita, or two of them were married not to two sisters, but to a mother and a daughter, o leisha ubas bita, or a mother and her granddaughter, o leisha ubas bina, granddaughter through a son, and the married brothers died without children. As far as the third brother is concerned, there is no option of yibum, because stands kukaslo. And therefore we have a case of krovas kukasa. All of this is based on the premise that Zika is like mixas issues, like induction. However, they need chalitza because the Isser here is only midrabban. It's not mamish achos ishto to be poter complete. But Rabbi Shimon poter. Shimon says that to the same extent there's no yibum, there's no chalitza. So we're going to have to understand the logic of Rabbi Shimon. Next, the Mishnah says, "Hoisa achas mehen asura olav." If one of these two are prohibited onto the achas shlishi, to the third brother, the Isser Erva, like for example, let's say Reuven, Shimon, and Levi are brothers, and Reuven and Shimon married two sisters. Reuven married Rachel, and let's say she's one of the arayos to Levi. Shimon marries Leah, the sister of Rachel, and Reuven and Shimon died below Banim. V'naflu shtei achios l'fnei Levi liyibu. Is aser bo muter b'achos. And you may recall that the Gemara earlier had asked why we need this mission. What's the chiddush here? So again, let's go over this. Levi is aser ba b'Rachel because she's an erva, umuter b'achosa, but he's allowed to be b'yavim Leah because that's not called achos kukaso, since Rachel is an erva. She doesn't have an afila for yibum, and there's no zik at all. However, what if Rachel is asura olav, not with an erva, but rather with an isur mitzvah, which means shnios larayos, which are only derabbanan, or be isur kedusha. So isur kedusha is a case of chayvei lavim, and on a deraisa level, we would say esei diyibum tochalos aseh, but in rabbanan it's asur. And therefore, if we go back to the doraisa, there is a zikas yibum. I mean, the Torah requires yibum in this case, even though it's chayvei lav, because esei dochalosas. So now the law is that Rachel and Leah are both cholzos lo misyavos, because on a doraisa level, they both have a zika to Levi. That's what he writes here in the Masechet. He says, "Kevin sheshteim midoraisa's kukoslo," either because of shnios larayos, which is derabbanan, or because in the case of an isur kedusha, we're going to say that esei dochalosas So we're not doing with a full-fledged erva, we're only dealing with chayvin lavin. So on a doraisa level is a zika. And therefore, if he would be miyabim one of them, he's being miyabim achotz kukas. That this part of the Mishnah is very familiar to us. I'm just going to take a change here. Oh. That works. Just need to spend it for me. Okay, so the Gemara says Tanya. And now we're going to try to understand Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon pote b'shteir. So we're talking about a case where two sisters fall for Yibum. And Rabbi Shimon says b'shtein is pote min achalitza umin ha'yibum. Now the question is this going to be a dorais? It seems like Rabbi Shimon is going to derive this from a pasuk. Shenemar v'isha el achosa lo sikach litzra. Okay, so what do we derive from this pasuk? He says that v'isha shenasi tzaras zulazu. At the time that the two achios, the two sisters, both fell for Yibum in front of one single Yavam, and the Torah says, Losi, which means Lo yela lecha lekuchin afilu bi'achas min. So this means that according to Reb Shimon, we're talking about a da'oraisa that's based on Z. And he's deriving from lo sikach litzrar that lo yehei lekuchin afilu bi'achas min. Now, if that be the case, then there's no yibum, and if there's no yibum, she goes back to the status of an erev aveshes. Now the Mishnah says, "Hoisa achas mian asura all of the iser erva, asur bo mutar bachos hasu lamali." I know hach. I mean, at the beginning of the parak, the first picture, we already had this principle, and the Gemara answers, "LeRabbi Shimon Itzra." We need to teach this according to Rabbi Shimon. Salka dait chamina hol v'yom Rabbi Shimon shtei achios ol chotzos lo misyavos. In other words, the Isser of Shtei Achios, according to Shimon, is Doraisa, is Ligzar. In other words, in the case of an Achos Erva, we should be Gozer, that there shouldn't be Yibum, Bishum Shtei Achios di Alma. Kamash Malon. 1 second. So what's the Havamina here? And what's the Maskana? So again, we're going according to Rav Shimon, and Shtei Achios is Dorais. So the Gemara says Ligzar. Ligzar, what's the Xera that we would have accepted, so to speak, or suggested in the Havamina? That in this case, Ligzar be'achos erev. Oh, I see. we're talking about a case where not only is it shtei achios, but in addition, there's another Iser Erva, correct? Like chamoso, all the different variations. Now, once there's an additional Erva, then that sister doesn't even fall for Yibum. So there's no problem and inhibition about being the Abba and the other sister, because one sister is an Erva. But we have a Hava, meaning that even in such a case, we'll have to block Yibum because we might get mixed up with another case of Shtei Achios where neither of them have an additional erva. Kamash Malon, that even Reb Shimon would allow, in a case of Achos erva, if in addition to being, Achos Ishto, so to speak, there's also another erva, and then we're not going to impose Xera, we're going to allow Fiyim. Iser mitzvah or Iser kedusha is cholzos v'lo misyavos. Here we're on Daf Chav Tes, and the Gemara asks, why do they need chalitza? Amar Rabbi Shimon, shtei achios lo cholzos v'lo misyavos. Right, because according to Rabbi Shimon, the erva of achos kukaso is doraisa, and it completely removes zikas yimo. How does this play out in the case of Iser Mitzvah, of Iser Kedusha? And why are you requiring Chalitza? In other words, the logic of the Mishnah is that Iser Mitzvah and Iser Kedusha on the right level as there is a Zika. And that's why we're going to need chalitza. But on the other hand, here we're talking about a case of shtei achios. And in a case of shtei achios, there is no zika, according to Rav Shimon, because that's an erva d'oraisa. So why do you need chalitza? So again, just very simply, two sisters fall for Yibum. According to Rav Shimon, they don't require chalitza because they don't fall for Yibum. Each one is an erva of achos kukas, which according to Rav Shimon we elevated to the dark of Vidorais. So now you're adding another erva, which is the Rabbana, namely he calls it Shnios Larayos. Right, Iser mitzvah, or you're adding an Iser la of kedusha. But what difference does it make? Even before you added that extra erva, there was no need for chalitza because according to Rav Shimon, we're talking about achos kukaso doraisa as an erva. So the Gemara answers, Gzeira mishum Iser mitzvah bi'alma. If we pater him up from chalitza, these two sisters, then people are going to think that the reason for the p'tur of chalitza is not because of shtei achios. They're going to think it's because of the Iser mitzvah or the Iser kedusha. And they're going to say, well, just like in this case, you pated the women and allowed them to get married without chalitza, so too in a case of an Iser mitzvah where there's no two sisters, they're not two sisters, we're going to let them go without chalitza because they don't know that the reason why you dropped the requirement of chalitza and allowed them to marry in the shuk is because of shtei achos. They think the reason you dropped it is because of the Iser mitzvah, which is the erva of shnios, or because of the Iser kedusha. So this whole business that they require chalitza is only a gzeira d'Rabbanan, which again raises a whole bunch of questions. Like, let's say she would get married without chalitza. It's only the Rabbanan, do we bust up the marriage, and so forth and so on. So the Gemara says, "Hot tenach." This can make sense. That is a chiyuv chalitza based on gzeira. Ihi And one of the two Yevamos, one of the two sisters that fell for Yibum, is also an additionally an Ereva. So we understand that the Gzera will apply to the Shnios Larayos. Right? So we're going to require Chalitza to that Ereva D'Rabbanan, so that people shouldn't think that because of the Ereva, she doesn't require Chalitza. But Achosa, my Ikalamema. Why does Achosa, who doesn't have that Ereva, why does she need Chalitza? She should be part of Chalitza because of Achos Kukasa, according to Rav Shimon. Right? The whole reason you require chalitza is because in the absence of chalitza, someone's going to say, well, the erva pot is up for chalitza. But that can't apply to the sister who's not an erva. So the Gemara answers, Gzera achosa mishum lasa dida. We're afraid that if we waive the requirement of chalitza with regard to one of these two sisters, then they might go a step further and waive the requirement of chalitza with regard to the other sister as well, who is an Isur mitzvah. Now, why isn't this Gzera l'Gzera? Does anybody ask that question? Should be Gzera l'Gzera. So again, let me just go over it. The sister who's not an Ereva at all doesn't require chalitza. We're going to require chalitza for the other sister because of Gzera, that they might think that an Isur mitzvah doesn't require chalitza. And now we're going to extend it to require chalitza even to the achosa she'ena Ereva, because they might be matir the other sister without chalitza. On a derais level, she doesn't need chalitza. So the worst case scenario, even if you don't require chalitza, right? Even if you don't have chalitza for the second sister, she doesn't need chalitza. Right? She can marry to Minashuk without chalitza. Ella, what you're afraid for another scenario that let's say she wasn't a sister, she was just an Isur mitzvah. You're going to think, oh, because of the Isur mitzvah, the arayas to Rabbanan, you don't need chalitza. But you're jumping from one situation to Gzera for the other, and from that to another Gzera. I don't understand why that's not Gzera l'Gzera. Let me just take a quick peek here in the Yalkut HaBiurim by chance. Yeah. Esam and Aleph. Mishum Lasa Vida. Does he have anything here? And Mishum Lasa Vida. I don't see anything. Oh no, I'm looking on the wrong page. Wait a second. That could be part of the problem. Not finding it. Right, let's just see what we have left here. What time is it? Okay, let's see if we can fit in the next few lines. Get up to the mission at least. So the Gemara asks the following: For Gabi Erva lo gazrinu. I'm going to read the commentary here. He says, "For Hagabi hoisa acht in asura bi iser erva dinusha asur bo mutabachosa ve'erva muteres l'shuklo chalitz kam nasa rumenes rachel she asura levi ach bi iser erva v'nasa shimenes leah mesu rumen shimlo abonim v'naflu l'fnei levi miyaven sherachel yotzis below chalitza v'yibum." So if you have two sisters that fell for yibum, and one of them is also an erva, she doesn't need chalitza. The logazrin. We're not going to require Rachel a chalitza for Rachel for Xera that they might be matir even Leah, right? You're saying that if one of the two sisters doesn't require chalitza, they may waive the requirement of chalitza for the other sister. Why don't you insist on Xera that Rachel should require chalitza just so that we're absolutely guaranteed that Leah will not be allowed to get married without chalitza? Because in the case of an achos iser mitzvah, we said that even though, according to Rabbi Shimon, she's an erva midin shtei achios, and she could, on a deraisa level, marry someone without chalitza, but we require chalitza because of her sister. Because her sister requires chalitza, she's an erva derabanan. I mean, of mishum mitzvah. So again, if your rule is that if one requires chalitza to the other, we're going to require chalitza for both of them. Why don't we apply that here in the case of Rachel? Shani erva, but in the case of a real erva, the migmar gmirle inchi and kala isla. Everybody knows about the Iser erva, and they understand that an erva can go out of yibum without chalitza. She has no zikas yibum. So what's kala isla? Lozeh she'ein achosa achos kuka. Everybody's going to understand that she, who's an erva, does not require chalitza. Whereas the other sister that fell for yibum does require chalitza because she's not an erva, and people will know that. But in the case of achotza chalitza mitzvah, if we're going to allow the other sister, who's not an Isser mitzvah, she doesn't have that additional stigma, so to speak, of an erva derabanan of shniyas larais. If we're going to be matir without chalitza, and that's based on Reb Shimon, who holds that achos kukaso is an erva doraisa, and then we're going to say mitam shenasu tzarazu lezu. Here we have to be choshesh that they'll be matir even the sister who has the erva without chalitza. The chosheshin. Sha'odam acher shelo yedas adin shel Rabbi Shimon. He doesn't know that achos kukasu is an erva doraisa, and therefore she doesn't require chalitza yibu. He thinks that the reason why the other sister will get away without chalitza is because of the erva of shniyos larayos. Is yira. He'll see shalocholzu l'isur mitzvah ulachosa lo yada im cholzu olo. He doesn't know anything about achosa, and yitel lomar the yomar shalachosa cholzu. Maybe they already gave chalitza to the other sister. So if you're going to waive the requirement of chalitza to the isur mitzvah, then they can enjoy the conclusion that she's an erva, and since she's an erva, she doesn't require chalitza. But an isur mitzvah is not really an erva, not an doraisa. Okay, then, so this is where we'll stop for today. Let's try to make a move. And tomorrow is Tuesday, correct? Good. Thank you so much and have a wonderful day.
Can I use your phone to make your instructions?
Great. Thank you so
Is it
much.
on?
Yeah, I think it's on.
Want to make
Oh, no. Actually, maybe